Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on megatrends. I'm Ilana Koegelenberg. I'm the Market Intelligence Manager and co-founder of Atmosphere, and I'll be presenting this session. Step one, let me get the hard part out of the way and share the presentation. It's always the thing on Zoom, except this time I can't ask you if you can see my screen. I think you'll hear this drill quite often throughout, but a reminder to post your questions in the live discussion box at the bottom. You'll also see that there's a poll in the tab, but we'll get to that point. But for now, let's get going. I think you would have seen this before, just a bit of context about the new Atmosphere and all our different brands and what we do now. You can see we're up to quite a lot of things, and all with the same purpose of scaling the clean cooling economy. I think Mark went into this into a bit more detail, but this is really just positioning ourselves for the new world that we find ourselves in, and where I'm going to be talking specifically about market trends and also leading on from what Armin was talking about on the technology side to see where the market is today and what the opportunities are that we can capture. And I think that's why I specifically also want to talk about our latest market report, which was published only last week. And we really look at all the not all the natural refrigerants, but all the latest information on important natural refrigerant technologies and the market in key regions, because simply there's just been such a demand for it. And as Mark said in his publisher's note of the report, in his 20 years of working in this industry, he can unequivocally say that natural refrigerants have never had it this good. Like, this is really the time. The industry is booming, as he said in his presentation as well. There's such a demand for it. Like, end users are driving it, the future generation, like from sustainability point of view, there's just, and Armin said it as well, the world is running out of excuses not to go natural. And it's as if everyone's really finally waking up to what we've been saying for 20 years, which is exciting. But then that obviously has led to a need for independent research. We've just been getting more and more requests of people asking for information on this. The market shows there's definitely this increasing investment opportunities and a potential to scale up quickly, but it really is such a complex landscape, the natural refrigerant market. It's not easy to navigate. And that's where we've seen a growing need to assess this opportunity within the market and to try and quantify it to a certain extent. And this is where this very extensive research study began last year already. It took a village, but it was worth it. And that's why we as Atmosphere undertook this research study, because we are so uniquely positioned to do it. We've been talking about natural refrigerants long before most people probably even knew it existed, when we were still just those people on the soapboxes shouting about it, and everyone said it's never going to happen, But today, I think the day has arrived. It is the time for natural refrigerants. And we had a lot of people working on this report. And I think that's why I also say we were so uniquely positioned to do this, because first of all, we're independent as Atmosphere, we're global. And we have researchers, analysts, economists, journalists, engineers, and designers on team. But it wasn't just our internal team. We could use the power of our global network, which today is more than 50,000 industry stakeholders strong from all over the world. And we did outreaches, we did surveys, we had discussions on Atmosphere Connect, we had focus groups, really to also test our theories and see what the industry is thinking. So this wasn't just us sitting down going, okay, this is what we think the market is about. Was really combining everything we've collected over the past 20 years and then all the people we've spoken to try and put together one comprehensive look of this is where the market is right now, and this is where we think it's going. Which, of course, as you can imagine, was easier said than done. So yeah, we published this report last week, as I said, 106 pages. We focused globally to obviously look at the totals and then the key regions where we've seen the most growth so far. So Europe, the US, and Japan. And then the sectors we focused on specifically was industrial refrigeration and commercial refrigeration, because traditionally for natural refrigerants, this is where there has been the most activity. Obviously, there's lots of different sectors, and we plan on doing this report every single year. And then we'll also expand to different applications and other types of projects. But this was our starting point, because this is where there was the most information. And so we looked at transcritical CO2, hydrocarbons, and low charge ammonia to really see what is the state of the market now and where are we going? And then, that where are we going part be projected until 2025, with also some insights into 2030 and how we expect the market to change and perform. So what did we actually cover? And there are 6 chapters in the textbook, report. Part 1 is the key trends affecting the growth of natural refrigerants. So first look at what is driving this growth and what is impeding it. And then, so looking at economic trends, policy trends, and then also obviously general and refrigerant specific trends, and quite in detail. Right? And we looked at each of them on what specific impact we expect each trend to have on the market. And then we moved on from the qualitative side to more the numbers, looking at what does the market look like today and how do we forecast the growth going forward. And as I said, we looked at commercial refrigeration specifically and industrial refrigeration. And in each of those, chapter 4 and 5, each of those are also further then broken down into each of the regions. So then it will be global, US, Europe, and Japan. And then in chapter 6, we looked at a world of no refrigerants. It's like the future is natural or no refrigerants. We never said it has to be natural refrigerants. There's also solutions that don't use vapor compression. So that's why our chapter 6 is kind of a look into the future and technology that's currently being developed and what is possible. So as you can see, there were lots of trends we covered, from training, CO2, market leaders. There's a whole lot of different things. And I won't go into all of them. I'll just give you a couple of highlights. If I remember to speak slower. So obviously we did a quite significant section on standards and policy, because it really is the biggest driver and the biggest driver for natural refrigerant, and the biggest barrier for natural refrigerant growth. We've seen it so many times, and I think particularly in Europe, where the standards come first and then the rest follows. It's always that carrot or the stick approach. You know, you need the restrictions from the policy, or you need some incentives to drive the growth and incentivize people to switch to more climate-friendly technologies. So in the policy section specifically, we also look and analyze each of the trends and their impact on the region. So for Europe, there was quite a lot included, because obviously Europe is seen as the leaders of the world when it comes to policy. What Europe does, the rest always tend to follow. I mean, at least what we've seen from the F-gas regulations thus far. So we include the Fit for 55 package, of course, EU F-gas regulation, energy labeling, more HFC tax at member state level, for instance, France, the updated timeline for that. We're also quite involved with the UK and their F-gas regulation. We attend a lot of these meetings. We have a whole policy division. Hydrocarbon charge limits, of course, have changed a lot. And then the new REACH and what could be different. Oh my goodness, let me not skip completely ahead. So, I mean, yeah, we'll list, obviously the policy will be discussed more in detail in the policy trends panel as well. So you can keep an eye out for that during this event. But yeah, let's get a look into some of the trends that we covered. I think we'll hear a lot about HFOs during the course of these 2 days. The use of them are increasing, and they are competing with natural refrigerants. As Armin also mentioned, they're seen as low GWP, but if you look at the entire process of how they are developed, they aren't really. I mean, there's so many concerns that are being raised. There's an increasing amount of reputable studies that are coming out, and it's whole governments, and it's not just someone making this up, you know. I mean, on 123YF, of course, the big issue, it's been the TFAs that are increasing in the freshwater. I always get the question, but I think the main argument always used is, but it's already in the water, but it's in the oceans. It's not supposed to be in the freshwater. And that's really where the challenge comes. And then, of course, in the next breath, the argument always comes, but 123,4-ZE is fine. It doesn't produce TFA. But then that comes back to the life cycle, where while producing that refrigerant, it actually, R23 is produced as a byproduct. The GWP of R23 is 18,400. That is significant. like none of these are future-proof solutions. And we really are expecting more legislation coming into play, limiting the use, because we really are just passing the buck further down the line. You know, as pretty much everyone who's spoken before me has said, we've moved from one chemical to the next, and it doesn't really make sense when we have the natural refrigerant solutions available. But we've got a panel specifically on this as well, so you can find out a bit more from the proper experts. So obviously, yeah, this trend is covered in depth in the report. We also look at some numbers of how HFOs have increased and what rates and the effect we expect. And of course, we can't look at trends without looking at COVID, which is covered in quite in depth because it does make a big impact. We obviously look at the global impact on the market and then regionally as well, because I think each region has recovered a bit differently, if I can optimistically use the word recovered already from the pandemic. And what we really saw is that there was a delay in orders last year. Of course, people were hesitant, projects were put on pause, no one really knew what was going on. There was a lot of uncertainty. And then that has, of course, led to pent-up demand for this year, which in the end, it has a positive impact because we expect that to continue, the increased demand. But it is also a bit of a challenge right now, particularly in Europe. Like OEMs, I'm reporting incredible demand. Some are saying like 300%. They've never had it this good, but that's also come with its own challenges because it meant that first of all, there's not enough skills and capacity to keep up with this. And there's also a challenge in terms of components and material and getting everything. It's basically getting everything built fast enough to meet this demand. But, you know, it's not a bad problem to have, I guess, all things considered. But the industry is rising to the challenge. They are keeping up and changing over, you know. And also another effect that COVID has had, it's increased online shopping, you know, as people don't want to go to stores, don't want to go outside. And that has really changed the types of projects out there. Because instead of having to put in more supermarkets now, you really just need lots of small stores and increased warehousing space. So it changes that entire dynamic, and it means that there's now a bigger demand for industrial systems. As Armin also pointed out, there's now bigger compressors in the world, which we also look at, which means there really is a big drive, an increase in industrial systems, particularly on the CO2 side. And then, of course, more smaller stores. We're seeing natural refrigerants. I mean, hydrocarbons have always been used a long time already in smaller stores, but even CO2, we're seeing more and more case studies, and particularly in Europe. So COVID's definitely had an impact, but I think, I mean, if nothing else, I think made people think hard and long about their choices about the future. So hopefully that's also had a positive effect on end users choosing natural refrigerants. I definitely see more of a, in general in the world, if you look at the news and how people speak about this, there's definitely a change in narrative. People are more environmentally conscious. I mean, I guess it's a lot of the natural disasters, not just COVID, but you can definitely see that as a trend. And then, of course, training always comes up. And I think Armin mentioned it as well, because just like policy, it is both a driver and a barrier for natural refrigerant adoption. The lack of skilled technicians is so often used as an excuse for not going natural. People just say like, oh, we can't put in the system because who's going to maintain it? But another good thing about the pandemic is that it's forced a lot of companies that offer training to go online and come up with new creative ways of training and more accessible ways of training. So it really has just opened it up a bit more. So, and I mean, even before that, we've seen a massive increase in training. So, I mean, that will also definitely have a positive effect on the industry, because the more skilled labor, technician, all of that we have, the easier it will be to motivate for these systems to be installed. And of course, I think I've presented on this quite a few times before, but we're also busy with almost done actually, with a textbook with German publisher VDE to translate their German textbook on all natural refrigerants and how to work with it into English, which was yet another journey. I think it's one of those, I think particularly because we thought it would just initially be a translation, but then as we adopted it for a global market, we actually realized how many other things we had to consider, and we even like rewrote some of the chapters like hydrocarbons to really make sure we produce something that is useful for the market, to have an independent textbook written by academics and really be like, this is what you need and how you need to work with these systems. But we specifically have a training panel on this tomorrow. So then you can ask your questions to some of the authors themselves, including Armin, who was in the previous session. So working with the best here. And while we're on the topic of training, we're not the only ones working on this. There's a lot of projects like really looking at how to lift the barrier of training for natural refrigerants. One of them is the Refrigerants Naturally for Life project, of which we're also a partner and we've been working on for a while. And then time has been going so strangely these days. But recently we published a new training providers database for this project, specifically targeted at small stores. And you can go type in exactly, and it's for Europe specifically, and you can type in what type of training you're looking for. Do you want it online, physical, what type of modules you want? And it gives you basically like a directory of training providers in Europe that you can approach. And this was, specifically for this RefNet for Life project, which is the aim of the project is to promote the uptake of climate-friendly cooling and alternatives among refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump end users and service providers. So that's also freely available and a great resource, which you can go check out on the RefNet website. But then speaking of trends, I think this has been coming up a lot more as well. And it's not, people have been saying this for a long time, especially EIA as well. It's the argument of 20-year GWP versus 100-year GWP. So this is a big trend we're seeing now, and there's more and more policymakers actually considering moving to the GWP 20 framework. We published this fact sheet also recently with Future Green Now, and this was really leveraging the network of the atmosphere community. We had multiple focus group meetings with people from around the world, like key stakeholders, and we really discussed in depth like how to put this together. And we're going to be putting a whole range of series of these fact sheets together. And this shows you how, currently, of course, GWP is measured in 100 years. And I mean, when we published this fact sheet, it got such a massive response. I think that's almost overwhelming. It was just shared and commented on incredibly. But because the reality is the atmospheric lifetime of most of these refrigerants used are closer to 20 years than 100 years. They break down in the atmosphere long before 100 years. So to look at the impact over 100 years doesn't really make sense, because by then it's completely diluted and it would have done the damage already. And also we don't have 100 years to address the climate emergency, And I mean, there was a big buzz over the latest IPCC report, which came out, which is the sum of all scientific human knowledge. Can't really argue with that. And interestingly, it actually said that all natural refrigerants, GWP is less than one or lower. And even hydrocarbons, which was previously thought to be 3, is only 1. But then conversely, some refrigerants like R32, which everyone always said it was low GWP enough to fit into legislation, is actually just a little bit higher. It's actually 771. So, this is definitely something to keep track of in terms of trends, because it doesn't make sense to sell an end user system, or as an end user to put in a system today, which is supposed to last you for 20 years, 15, 20 years, just to have it be banned or restricted by the policy. That's not future-proof, and you're going to be wasting a lot of money to have to take that out again. So it's so important to actually keep up with the policy side of things and trends like this. So that's also, we've got it freely available for download, just a 2-page fact sheet. It really just shows this is the 100-year GWP, this is the 20-year, and then we're going to update it next month with the new IPCC values. So keep an eye out for that. And then obviously in the textbook, we do, like I said, we did general trends and policy and all that, but then we also look at refrigerant specific trends for the trends we cover. So we look at the hydrocarbon charge limit update in key regions. As we know, the IEC has updated it to now be 500 grams per charge, but that still has to kind of be followed through on national level. So each government is really dealing with it in their own way. So how they interpret it is up to them. So we look at how where Europe is in this process and the US and Japan. I mean, they've actually made some progress. And then Armin also spoke about transcritical CO2 in warmer climates. And there's just more and more technology innovations that's making this possible. I think I get this question every time I present anywhere else, where people just say, but transcritical CO2 is just not efficient in warmer climates. It's not a good option, but that's no longer true. There's countless of examples of successful case studies and best practice stories on all our websites, well, particularly r744.com because it's on the CO2 side, but also others. It's been proven that is no longer a barrier. And like I spoke about before, the CO2 in small stores, definitely seeing an increase in that. Because before, I think people consider it too expensive. But as the demand has grown and technology has improved and gotten simpler, that cost has come down and it's become more feasible, especially if you look at the life cycle costing and not just the CapEx. We're also seeing an increase of low charge ammonia systems, particularly in places where there is a restriction in terms of legislation and barriers for using traditional overfeed ammonia systems. So this is a great way to capitalize on the efficiency of ammonia and kind of limit the risk. And then Armin also mentioned, we're seeing more ammonia CO2 in supermarkets even. So there's a whole lot of things happening here. And we cover them in quite detail and see exactly what is happening and how it's impacting the market. It's one thing to have the number and be like, there's this many CO2 systems in the world. But if you don't know how that is going to change or what's impacting that or the kind of context behind that, that is just a number, what is informing that number. But then, of course, we do know the numbers are important. So this is what we do and what we do well. So we've looked at the market sizes and seen how it's going. So we'll give you a sneak peek into the report. Of course, I'm not going to share all of the information because we want you to go see what it's about. So, like I said, we covered these sectors for commercial and industrial, and then for each of them, we looked at transcritical CO2 for both industrial and CO2 and commercial, and then also hydrocarbons in commercial and industrial low charge ammonia, because these were really the sectors we saw that there's the most movement currently, and also that we have the most knowledge in. And then for each of them, we really looked at, like I said, what is happening now, what are the key trends driving the market, and then what would we expect 2025 to look like, and how we expect this to change towards 2030. So then also, why did we choose? Like I said, why else did we look? Why is commercial refrigeration important, and why industrial refrigeration? So we've tried to visualize it in a way that makes sense, and it's also such a powerful image. Because we looked at the Green Cooling Initiative has put up this really great website that shows you, it's almost like a world map, and you can look at the direct and indirect emissions of any country. And essentially, the direct emissions are just the refrigerants, So this is just the refrigerant impact. By just switching to natural refrigerants, you remove all of this because and Europe and that impact. I was quite surprised that the Europe impact, it's by far the largest. It's almost 32 million metric tons of emissions. That's 6 million cars that you can take off the road for a year. That's a lot of emissions just by simply switching to natural refrigerants. And globally, that is a much higher number, 170 million, And the same for industrial. Europe is on 13.5 million. Globally, it's 124. That is a big impact we can make just by switching to natural refrigerants. So these things matter. Of course, Armin showed the other map. We looked at the key regions and how it's changed. Europe has gone from the number last year was 29,000. And from our latest data collection update this year, it's gone as high as 40,000, But a lot of that can be traced back to the F-gas and the restricting sectoral bans that just come into play. So we expect this number to climb very quickly. Europe is by far the largest share of CO2 transcritical installations in the world. And this is industrial and commercial installations. And then to represent it like this, if you actually want to see what the market penetration is, you can see that it's actually growing quite quickly. And this is, Europe is, and this is including small stores, hey? It's much higher if you just look at supermarkets. But if you look at all commercial refrigeration, including small stores on food retail side, that's already on 14.1%. But yeah, that's why it looks a bit lower, because we also look at small stores. But Europe is doing great, and we expect that to climb quite rapidly. So this is the part that I spoke about before, to go check out the poll in your live discussion tab at the bottom, there where you post the questions. On the third tab, you'll see a poll with a question. That's the transcritical CO2 penetration rate, the graph I just showed you. What do you expect this rate to be by 2025? So in the next 4 years, how much do you think it's going to increase? Let me give you a few seconds to vote, and then I'll check the answers. Oh, we're getting quite mixed reviews. It's at this point is a three-way split between the first three options. So at least everyone thinks it's going to grow. But yeah, so I think we'll have to, you can still carry on voting for the session in this poll. And then we'll also share the results at the end of the event on Atmosphere Connect. But yeah, check it out. So yeah, moving from transcritical CO2 to the hydrocarbons, this has also grown quite fast. And this is specifically, we're not looking at the small kind of like vending machines or any of those units. This is just in commercial refrigeration, so not light commercial and all of that. So then the number would be significantly higher when you're putting in all those Coca-Cola machines and all of that. This is just the commercial systems. So Europe is quite far ahead already at 2.7 million, and we're seeing more in these being put in every day. It really is become a no-brainer, you know. On low charge ammonia, Europe has grown to 2,450. There's also more of these coming in. In America, it's actually growing quite fast as well, because the ammonia there is quite preferred, but that's a topic for another day. Now, for each of, obviously we've taken the numbers out here, but this is just so you can get a sense of the type of graphs and information we have in the report. And you can see here, so this one's specifically for Europe, the growth in transcritical CO2 commercial. And we look at it, so for all of the regions, for all of the applications, and then for industrial and commercial, you know. So I think there's about 12 sections we do. And then it looks at the historical data, and then how we expect this to grow to 2025, like kind of giving it a higher limit and a lower limit. So between the kind of yellow, the orange and green line, that's the expected growth. And we give those numbers and calculations as well. And I mean, already from this graph, you can see that we expect quite significant growth, ambitious growth to continue in the transcritical CO2 market. You know, this is really a good sector to invest in. And for those who have done so already, you're making good choices. I mean, in the end, the conclusion of the report is natural refrigerants are here to stay, and it can be viewed as a good investment for any company looking to future-proof its business. You know, it's not, like Alvin said as well, it does create jobs. We're not expecting job losses or anything. This is not just about emissions or doing this for the good of the world, which we should be doing, of course. But it's also, it makes business sense. This is a good investment opportunity. This is where the world is heading. I mean, this is where the world has arrived already in many places. So I don't think we can argue against that anymore. The question is now, how do you capitalize on that? How do you get on the bus and not miss the bus, you know? And that's why it's so exciting to have this event over 2 days and really check in with all the market leaders in Europe and the policy people and academics and see where are we now and what can we expect, you know, to make sure we all equip ourselves for the future. So, of course, yeah, the report you can get on our new website, atmosphere.cool. That is the full link. There's no .com or no anything. It's .cool. And yeah, the people attending this event can get a €200 discount if you use the ATMO EU21 code. But you can see the presentations will all be online still at the event afterwards. So you can come check back here if you want. Yeah, and also, I mean, I've spoken about Connect before. This is our Slack-based network that we've started. We're almost at 1,000 users now and members. And you can go to atmosphere.cool/connect and apply to join. And it's been very exciting just to have people from all around the world being able to network and chat to each other and share ideas. And this is really the power of our community and our network. So feel free to join us. Yeah, now it's the fun part, the questions. I see I've got a whole lot coming through already. Oh, I hope you're not asking me difficult things. When I moderate myself, I can't really screen them. But Colin asked about what did you notice regarding the availability of components and how that influences the growth of natural refrigerant solutions? We see a large increase in delivery times and often have to switch to other suppliers in order to help finish the cooling installations to open up the shop. That is sadly that has been a challenge. I think the components really has been a problem. And I think a lot of the OEMs we've spoken to, they're really frustrated. And some of them have had to come up with alternative solutions, find new suppliers, maybe sometimes like actually it increases their costs to get it from get it somewhere else. But I think just like with everything else, that's the kind of thing that I think in the beginning, it's very busy and erratic as people try and solve this problem. But I think the industry is moving very quickly in terms of coming up with alternative solutions and finding ways to actually address this problem. Because obviously it's in any company's best interest to be able to meet demand as fast as they could and put out as many products as they can, makes financial sense. I think it is a bit unfortunate for the end users because like you said, it's a bit of delays and it's the last thing anyone wants, but it's just, I think it's been unavoidable. I think it was very surprising to everyone, and hats off to all the OEMs working around the clock and working weekends and doing everything they can to get those orders out. But hopefully that won't be a challenge in the future as they now come up with the solutions and ways to actually circumvent this. But yeah, the components it's a bit of a problem. But I think now that they've known how to, they'll learn and they grow. I've got another question from Francesco as well. Looking at new stores, not enough. He says, for each new store with natural refrigerants, there are 20 old stores still working with high GWP HFCs 4,000 times and leaking up to 15% per year in some cases. Millions of tons of CO2 equivalent every year is being leaked globally. Decarbonizing commercial refrigeration requires national retrofit plans and acts, see the Flemish case, laws that require or incentivize the replacement of dirty cooling with natural refrigerants, and asking if I'm aware of any other cases in Europe. Oh, there are so many, there's so much happening in terms of decarbonization. I think specifically on the heat pump sector, I know there's a lot happening there and moving quickly. I mean, country specific, I can't think at the top of my head now, but you definitely are right. The retrofits is a big market, and specifically in Europe, that's where the biggest potential lies. And I mean, companies have actually been retrofitting quite quickly. I think Colin can share those statistics as well of how quickly they've got plans for how, on the end user side, how many stores they want to convert every year. And I think that's also, as much as it has to come from the government and policy driving it, I think the biggest driver is market leaders, like the end users. We have a whole section about that in the report as well. It's, for instance, like Lawson in Japan, they as an end user drove the market moving to that technology, because if they're asking for it, the industry will deliver, So, but yeah, I mean, retrofit's a big market. And interesting enough, in America, it's not as much. I mean, when we were having our focus groups, the Europeans were saying that's where a lot of focus is to switch over on the retrofit side, but not so much in the US. But, yeah, lots of questions. Colin also asked about my numbers on direct CO2 emissions. Are you sure that's not underreporting what's happening in the USA? I was actually thinking that myself when I looked at it. I was very surprised that the US is so low. But I think at least on the industrial side, we know that they do like ammonia, and same as Europe. We've got numbers from the Global Cold Chain Alliance about the refrigerant use, for instance, between their cold storage users and Europe and across the world. And yeah, it's the ammonia usage is incredible. I think natural refrigerant use is already as high as 90% in the industrial side. So I think there it makes a bit more sense why it's lower. But yeah, I mean, commercial, like there could be a few things that's not being looked at. Laura asked, does the report include the consumption of refrigerants in tons? No, we didn't look specifically at refrigerants as raw exports. We looked specifically at applications and what's happening and per application and what's being used, but not in terms of refrigerant volume. We were looking in terms of either installations for CO2 and on the low charge ammonia side, like how many the installations are growing and the usage. And then for hydrocarbons, it was in terms of units. That is one of those things that, we had to work with information that was obtainable. I mean, I have a nice wish list of all the things I would like to get, but it's very difficult. But also that's a very good idea of something to include in the 2022 version of the report. I mean, this is really our first attempt, and there's so many things we still want to tackle. Interestingly, also the retrofit issue mentioned here. I mean, we are planning a whole section on that the next time. We briefly touched upon it here, but we really do want to look at the conversion rate for that. Yeah, so Sergio asked about the hydrocarbon installations, what type of information it uses, what type of units we include. Yeah, so it does plug in remote water loops, pretty much all of those. It just doesn't include the light commercial sector things. So yeah, like the small systems like for Coca-Cola and those guys, like the vending machines and all of that. But it includes everything you've mentioned here. Yes, we got a question about if you have the numbers per country in Europe. I wish. We don't. Even the OEMs don't. They don't keep the numbers like that. Most of them, they only have the numbers of this is what we produce for Europe. It is almost impossible to get information on that granular level per country, which is something we get quite often. It's not impossible to get. We would just have to undertake a separate tailor-made research study for that. It was just not something that was feasible for the report, Yeah, so this was, and then, we got a question about automotive air conditioning and application. That is a whole other story, as on the car side. And there's a lot happening on Mac. I mean, that can be a report all on itself. And that is also something we're considering for the next report. But like I said, for this one, we specifically only looked at commercial and industrial refrigeration. And with that information, we already covered 106 pages. But yeah, there's a lot happening on the automotive side. I mean, as we can see, that's where there's been a lot of, unfortunately, HFOs have come in strong and aggressively and taking a lot of market share. But we are also seeing some creative solutions and things that are alternative solutions being tested, specifically on the refrigerated transport side. There's already a lot of natural refrigerants on there. And there are also solutions on the Mac side, but we haven't covered it specifically for this one. Let me see if your poll results have changed. I see a couple of you have voted again. Well, have now voted rather. And now the numbers are on 60%. But yeah, by far the majority believe that by 2025, the market penetration could be 20 to 40% for commercial refrigeration in Europe. That is very optimistic. And I like to be optimistic. So I think that's definitely achievable. So let me stop sharing actually. But yeah, if there's no more questions, perfectly timed, you guys made it very difficult for me. No, I'm just kidding. So thank you so much for your time. You can also send me a question on the platform on Swapcard, I'm there. Or you could find me on ATMO Connect. I'm always happy to answer more questions. And in the meantime, get ready for your next session. It's going to be the CEO interview with Andreas Meyer, from the Managing Director from TECO. And he's always very knowledgeable and always have very interesting points to share directly from the end user, OEM in Europe. So yeah, I'll see you a bit later and enjoy the rest of your event. Thank you so much.